The unconventional solution. Dr. Zio's research facility on Europa Prime was considered the most advanced xenotechnology center in the known galaxy. The massive complex, carved into the moon's icy surface, housed laboratories dedicated to unlocking the mysteries of precursor civilizations. But none were as heavily monitored as Lab 7, where the Rari armor floated in its containment field, its gunmetal gray surface reflecting the soft blue lights of the research equipment. The armor had become something of a legend in the scientific community, not for its technological advancement, but for its apparent ability to humiliate even the most distinguished researchers who attempted to interface with it. Dr. Zio had documented every failure in excruciating detail, each attempt adding another layer to the growing mythology surrounding the mysterious artifact. Running test sequence 743, Dr. Zio announced, his translation unit converting his clicks and whistles into standard galactic common. The assembled scientists, representing 37 spacefaring civilizations, watched with a mixture of anticipation and resignation as a Proximan warrior approached the armor. The Proximan, General Cthax, was considered one of the most disciplined minds in the quadrant. His species' natural ability to maintain absolute mental control made him an ideal candidate. As he stepped into the testing chamber, his scaled skin gleaming under the harsh lights, there was a collective holding of breath, or equivalent respiratory functions. Beginning neural synchronization, Cthax reported, his voice steady as he reached out toward the armor. The moment his clawed hand touched the surface, the armor's blue lines pulsed once, twice, and then everything went wrong. The general's scales began to glow in rainbow patterns, and he started performing what appeared to be an ancient Earth dance routine known as the robot. Test 743 concluded, Dr. Zio said wearily, watching as medical staff led the still-dancing general away. Results: failure, with unexpected choreographic side effects. Later that evening, as Dr. Zio reviewed the day's data in his office, his terminal pinged with an incoming message. The sender's credentials made all 6 of his eyes widen. Xenotech Division's Special Projects Initiative. Dr. Zio, the message read, we've been monitoring your progress with the Rari artifact. Recent events suggest traditional approaches are proving ineffective. We're authorizing the deployment of an unconventional solution specialist. Her name is Jen Li. The attached file made Dr. Zio's antenna twitch. The human service record was unusual. She had once repaired a quantum communications array using nothing but a rubber band and what humans called a paperclip. Another incident involved fixing a malfunctioning AI by challenging it to a game of riddles. Her methods defied conventional scientific understanding, yet her success rate was undeniable. Computer, Dr. Zio called out, display full profile on Jen Li. The holographic display filled with images and reports. Jen Li had a habit of solving impossible problems by doing exactly what no reasonable scientist would consider. She approached technology not as systems to be analyzed, but as personalities to be understood. The more Dr. Zio read, the more his initial skepticism began to shift. The Rari armor had resisted every traditional approach. Perhaps it was time for something completely different. He found himself particularly intrigued by one of Jen's quoted statements, sometimes the problem isn't that something's broken, it's that we're trying to fix it wrong. The decision to bring her in wasn't easy. The project had already drawn criticism for its numerous failures, and bringing in a human known for what some called chaos engineering would raise eyebrows across the scientific community. But as Dr. Zio looked at the armor floating in its containment field, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The pulsing patterns of light almost seemed playful. Computer, he said finally, send confirmation. Request immediate transfer of Specialist Li to Europa Prime. The response came almost instantly, transfer approved. Specialist Li will arrive within 48 standard hours. Note, request for adequate snack supplies and good music included in transfer requirements. Dr. Zio's translation unit struggled to interpret his reaction sound, something between a sigh and a laugh. As he prepared the necessary documentation, he couldn't shake the feeling that the armor's light patterns had shifted, almost as if it was looking forward to meeting this unusual human. The next day, Dr. Zio called an emergency meeting of the project's leading researchers. The amphitheater buzzed with multiple species worth of nervous energy as he explained the new direction they would be taking. Distinguished colleagues, he began, for 743 attempts, we have approached this artifact as a puzzle to be solved, a system to be cracked. We have tried force, we have tried finesse, we have tried every scientific method known to our combined civilizations. Perhaps it is time to try something unscientific. The reaction was immediate and vocal. The quantum collective's representative vibrated with indignation, their energy form creating interference patterns in nearby devices. The Zenari delegation's crystalline forms flickered with what could only be described as scientific horror. You can't be serious, the Void Dancer's representative said, their containment suit dimming in disapproval. This human's methods are completely unorthodox. She once fixed a temporal paradox by, they paused, as if the words were painful to say, by showing it funny cat videos from Earth's ancient internet. And it worked, Dr. Zio pointed out. The paradox resolved itself. As the arguments continued, Dr. Zio's sensors picked up an interesting reading from the armor. Its energy signature had changed slightly, becoming more active than it had been in months. He wondered if it could somehow sense the chaos that was about to unfold. The meeting concluded with no consensus, but that didn't matter. The decision had been made, and Jen Li was already on her way. As the scientists filed out, still arguing in various languages and energy patterns, Dr. Zio approached the armor. I hope you're ready, he said quietly, his translation unit off. Because I suspect nothing will be the same after she arrives. The armor's lights pulsed in a pattern that, for the first time in 743 attempts, looked almost like anticipation. In orbit above Europa Prime, a small transport ship dropped out of FTL, its hull decorated with what appeared to be hand-painted stars and the words, "Don't panic," in large, friendly letters. Inside, Jen Li was packing her unconventional toolkit, humming an ancient Earth tune, and wondering what kind of music an ancient alien armor might enjoy. The ship's AI, which Jen had modified to have what she called a better sense of humor, announced their approach to the research facility. Hey, Betty, Jen called out to the AI, what do you think? Should we make an entrance? Based on my calculations, the AI responded with what could only be described as a digital smirk, maximum chaos would be achieved by arriving exactly on time, contrary to all expectations. Jen laughed, shouldering her beaten-up toolkit. I like the way you think. Let's go meet our new friend. As the transport ship began its descent, the Rari armor's energy readings spiked briefly, its patterns shifting into something that had never been seen before in all 743 documented attempts. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have said it looked like the armor was smiling. The stage was set for what would become either the most brilliant or most disastrous approach to xenotechnology in galactic history. Probably both. Breaking protocol. Jen Li's arrival at the Europa Prime research facility was exactly as punctual as she'd planned, which immediately threw everyone into confusion. The security AI had prepared for every possible scenario except a human arriving exactly on schedule. Welcome to Europa Prime research facility, the AI stated, its protocols slightly glitching as it tried to process this unexpected display of timeliness. Please present your, is that a lava lamp in your toolkit? Quantum harmonic resonator, Jen replied cheerfully, pulling out the groovy device. Also makes excellent mood lighting for late-night debugging sessions. Don't worry about cataloging everything in there, last AI that tried ended up requesting a vacation. The security AI's processing cores whirred in distress as Jen casually strolled through the checkpoint, her mismatched boots leaving slightly different colored footprints on the pristine floor. Behind her, Betty, her ship's AI, was engaging the facility's systems in what appeared to be a discussion about the nature of binary humor. Dr. Zio was waiting in the main atrium, all 6 of his appendages twitching nervously as Jen approached. Before he could launch into his prepared briefing, she held up a hand. Before we start the official stuff, she said, reaching into her toolkit, I brought snacks. Can't properly meet a mysterious alien artifact on an empty stomach. Want some? She offered what appeared to be a bag of iridescent chips that occasionally changed flavor based on the consumer's mood. Miss Lee, Dr. Zio began, his translation unit struggling to maintain professional tones, this is a highly sensitive research facility dealing with potentially dangerous precursor technology. We have protocols. Oh, excellent. Jen interrupted, pulling out a tablet. I love protocols. They're like recipes, best when you know exactly which ones to break and how to break them creatively. She tapped the screen, bringing up a holographic display of the facility's security measures. By the way, your quantum encryption could use some tweaking. It's a bit grumpy in the morning, probably needs more coffee subroutines. The Zenari scientists watching from their crystalline observation chambers flickered in patterns that indicated either extreme distress or suppressed amusement. It was often hard to tell with crystalline life forms. As they approached Lab 7, Jen's demeanor shifted subtly. Her movements became more focused, her eyes sharper. She pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a kaleidoscope and a seismograph. Hello there, she said softly, not to Dr. Zio or any of the watching scientists, but to the armor floating in its containment field. The armor's energy patterns shifted, its usual blue lights taking on a slightly curious tinge. Interesting, Jen muttered, adjusting her device. The harmonic resonance is all wrong. You've been trying to talk to it in quantum algorithms and neural interfaces, haven't you? That's like trying to start a friendship by performing brain surgery. Dr. Zio's antenna twitched. The armor has demonstrated highly advanced security protocols. Every attempt to interface with it has resulted in unusual consequences. Not security protocols, Jen corrected, circling the containment field. Defense mechanisms. Big difference. Security protocols are rigid, predictable. This? She gestured at the armor's shifting patterns. This is more like someone dealing with awkward party guests by making them do the chicken dance. She pulled out her tablet again, this time displaying the records of previous attempts. Look at these responses. The hive mind tries to merge consciousness, they all start telling dad jokes. The quantum collective attempts forceful integration, they get rickrolled, ancient Earth mimetic warfare, very effective. These aren't random glitches. This is someone with a sense of humor. The assembled scientists watched in horror as Jen began setting up what looked like a combination of entertainment system, snack bar, and what she called a chill zone around the containment field. She arranged comfortable seating, set up soft lighting, and even installed a small water feature that somehow produced a sound that was relaxing to all known species simultaneously. Miss Lee, one of the void dancers interrupted, their containment suit pulsing with concern, what exactly is your strategy here? Strategy? Jen laughed, pulling out the lava lamp/quantum harmonic resonator. I'm not strategizing. I'm setting up for movie night. You've all been trying so hard to crack this thing open, figure out how it works. But has anyone just tried hanging out with it? Getting to know it? The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle bubbling of the water feature and what sounded suspiciously like the opening notes of ancient Earth jazz music coming from somewhere in Jen's toolkit. Think about it, she continued, now arranging an assortment of snacks that somehow managed to be compatible with every species' digestive system. The Rari were advanced enough to create armor that's still functioning after who knows how long. Smart enough to include defenses that don't harm, just embarrass. And creative enough to turn each attempt at forced entry into a cosmic practical joke. Does that sound like a civilization that would respond well to sterile lab protocols? The armor's lights had begun pulsing in time with the jazz music, its patterns more active than they'd been in months. Dr. Zio's sensors were picking up energy readings unlike anything they'd recorded in 743 attempts. First rule of xenotechnology, Jen said, settling into a comfortable chair and pulling out what appeared to be a collection of Earth entertainment from various eras, is to remember that sufficiently advanced tech is indistinguishable from a person having a really good time messing with you. She looked up at the armor, her expression warm and open. So, what do you say? Want to watch some classic sci-fi and see how wrong we got everything about space travel? The armor's response was subtle but unmistakable. Its usual defensive patterns shifted, the blue lights taking on a warmer hue. And there, just for a moment, the patterns aligned in what could only be described as an approximation of a smile. Dr. Zio found himself making a sound his translation unit couldn't quite process, something between a scientific observation and a laugh. As he watched Jen begin what she called proper introductions, with one of the most powerful and mysterious artifacts ever discovered, he realized that in 743 attempts, they had never once considered the simplest approach, treating the armor not as a subject to be studied, but as a person to be befriended. The quantum collective's representative vibrated with what might have been disapproval, but even they couldn't deny that the armor's energy readings were showing more positive response than ever before. The Zenari scientists had begun taking notes on what they called the human chaos factor, while the Void Dancers were quietly discussing the possibility that their entire approach to xenotechnology might need revision. As the first movie began playing, an ancient Earth film about artificial intelligence that made Jen snort with laughter and the armor's lights flicker in what seemed like amusement, Dr. Zio realized that this might be the beginning of something entirely new in the field of xenotechnology research. Or, as Jen would put it later in her official report, sometimes the best way to understand advanced technology is to Netflix and chill with it. The armor, pulsing contentedly in its containment field, seemed to agree. Unexpected connections. 3 weeks into what Jen Lee had officially dubbed Operation Armor Party, much to the quantum collective's continued distress, the research facility on Europa Prime had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. Lab 7, once a sterile environment of pure scientific inquiry, now resembled what Jen called a proper hangout spot, complete with ambient lighting that synchronized with the armor's energy patterns. The most remarkable change, however, wasn't in the lab's appearance but in the armor's behavior. Its defensive mechanisms, once triggered by any approach, had evolved into something more nuanced. The armor still rejected direct interface attempts, but now it did so with what could only be described as personality. Log entry 47, Jen dictated to her tablet, sprawled in her now customary spot near the containment field. Our friend here has developed a distinct taste in Earth entertainment. Strongly prefers comedy over drama, seems particularly fond of stories involving mistaken identity and clever problem solving. Also has opinions about music, showed strong positive response to jazz and classical, but literally turned its back on country music. Didn't know it could do that. The armor's lights pulsed in what had become recognizable as amusement. Over the past weeks, Jen had begun to decode its various patterns, the sharp, quick pulses of laughter, the slow waves of contemplation, the spiral patterns that indicated curiosity. Dr. Zio, reviewing the latest data, had to admit that Jen's unconventional approach was yielding unprecedented results. The armor's energy signature had stabilized into new patterns, its defensive responses becoming less random and more communicative. "Miss Lee," he called out, approaching her workspace, which looked like a cross between a teenager's bedroom and a quantum physics lab, "the latest readings are interesting." "You mean how it started anticipating our questions?" Jen grinned, pulling up a holographic display of the armor's energy patterns. "Watch this." She turned to the armor. "Hey buddy, remember that scene from yesterday's movie? The one with the AI learning to dance?" Before she even finished speaking, the armor's lights had begun moving in a complex pattern that mimicked the movie scene perfectly. But there was more. Subtle variations in the pattern suggested improvements to the choreography. "It's not just mimicking anymore," Jen explained, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's creating. Interpreting. Adding its own spin on things. And look at this," she pulled up another data stream. The quantum fluctuations during our movie sessions? They're not random. They're synchronized with emotional peaks in the stories. It's not just watching, it's feeling. Dr. Zio's sensors quivered with excitement. Are you suggesting the armor is empathizing? Jen finished. Absolutely. But here's the real kicker, she pulled out her quantum harmonic resonator, still disguised as a lava lamp, and adjusted some settings. These patterns here. They're getting stronger every day. The armor isn't just responding to us anymore. It's reaching out. The implications were staggering. For centuries, scientists had assumed the Rari armor was simply an advanced piece of technology with sophisticated defense mechanisms. But what if it was something more? Their discussion was interrupted by an alert from the facility's security system. A delegation from the Galactic Science Council had arrived for an unscheduled inspection. Led by the formidable Dr. Vextera, a being of pure energy whose containment suit crackled with barely contained power, they swept into Lab 7 with an air of academic authority. Dr. Zio, Vextera's voice resonated through their translator, we've been monitoring your unusual approach to this research. Their gaze fell on Jen's workspace, taking in the comfortable chaos with visible disapproval. The Council has concerns. Before anyone could respond, the armor's lights shifted dramatically. The usual soft blue took on a deeper hue, and the patterns became more complex, almost protective. Jen, watching the display, tried to hide a smile. With all due respect, Council member, she said, standing up and straightening her lab coat, which was covered in patches from various Earth science fiction shows, maybe you should talk to our friend here directly. The artifact is not sentient, Vextera stated firmly. It is a technological relic that. The armor interrupted with a brilliant display of lights that somehow managed to convey both amusement and contradiction. Then, in a move that made every scientist in the room freeze, it began projecting a series of images into the air around its containment field. The images told a story, scenes from Earth entertainment mixed with mathematical equations, emotional responses translated into quantum variables, and something else, fragments of memories that didn't belong to any of them. Glimpses of a civilization that had mastered not just technology, but the integration of consciousness and machine. It's not just armor, Jen breathed, watching the display with wonder. It's a bridge. The Rari weren't trying to create protective gear, they were trying to create understanding. A way to share consciousness across species, across time itself. Dr. Zio's translation unit struggled to keep up with his excited clicks and whistles. The failed attempts weren't failures at all, Jen finished. They were conversations. The armor was trying to communicate in the only way it could, through shared experiences, through humor, through stories. We were so focused on trying to make it work, we didn't realize it was already working exactly as intended. The armor's display shifted again, showing scenes from the past weeks, Jen laughing at old movies, Dr. Zio's excited scientific observations, even the quantum collective's disapproving vibrations. But now they could see what they'd missed before, the subtle ways the armor had been learning from them, trying to bridge the gap between its ancient programming and their modern understanding. Vextera's containment suit hummed with increasing frequency as they processed this revelation. If this is true, if the armor is indeed a consciousness bridge, then everything we thought we knew about the Rari needs to be re-evaluated, Dr. Zio said. They weren't just an advanced civilization, they were trying to ensure that when they were found, they could share their knowledge in a way that wouldn't overwhelm or destroy the finding species. Like leaving a message in a bottle, Jen added, but making sure the message could adapt to whoever found it. The perfect universal translator, wrapped in a sense of humor to keep it from being misused. The armor's lights pulsed in what was unmistakably approval. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to show them something new, images of its creation, of the Rari themselves, and of a legacy waiting to be understood by those who were ready to listen rather than command. As the council members watched in stunned silence, Jen turned to Dr. Zio with a grin. still think my methods are too unconventional. The scientist made a sound that his translation unit rendered as a laugh. Miss Lee, I believe unconventional is exactly what the Rari were hoping for. Awakening. The revelation about the armor's true nature as a consciousness bridge sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Within days, Europa Prime was flooded with researchers from every corner of the galaxy, all eager to witness what was being called the Rari Renaissance. But while others scrambled to understand the implications, Jen Lee noticed something that everyone else had missed. The patterns are changing, she told Dr. Zio one evening, while they reviewed the day's data. The lab was quiet, most of the visiting scientists having retired for the night. It's not just communicating anymore. It's anticipating. Dr. Zio studied the holographic displays, his antenna twitching in concentration. The armor's energy signatures had indeed evolved, becoming more complex, more purposeful. Anticipating what? Before Jen could answer, the armor initiated a new sequence of light patterns. Unlike its previous communications, these were urgent, almost insistent. Images began forming in the air around the containment field, star maps, gravitational calculations, and what appeared to be a countdown. Oh, Jen said softly, her eyes widening as she decoded the message. It's anticipating them. Them. The Rari. They're coming back. The armor's display shifted, showing a series of astronomical events, the alignment of distant pulsars, the convergence of quantum fields, patterns in spacetime that had been building for millennia. The Rari hadn't just disappeared, they had stepped sideways in time, waiting for the right moment to return. They didn't leave this armor as just a message, Jen realized, her voice filled with wonder. It's a beacon. A key. And we just helped activate it. The facility's sensors began registering anomalies throughout the solar system. Quantum fluctuations increased exponentially, and space itself seemed to shimmer with potential energy. The armor's light patterns accelerated, matching the rising frequency of the disturbances. Dr. Zio's translation unit struggled to keep up with his rapid observations. The containment field, it's not holding the armor anymore. It's holding reality, Jen finished. She approached the field, her hand hovering near its surface. All this time, we thought we were studying it. But it was studying us, waiting to see if we were ready. The armor's lights focused on Jen, and for the first time, it spoke, not in words, but in pure consciousness. Images, emotions, and understanding flooded her mind, the Rari's journey, their discovery of spaces between moments, and their plan to return when they found a species capable of bridging the gap between technology and empathy. They didn't want to risk their knowledge being misused, Jen explained to Dr. Zio, her voice distant as she processed the armor's communication. So they created this filter. The humor, the rejection of force, the response to kindness, it was all a test. They needed to find someone who would treat their legacy not as a weapon or a tool, but as a form of connection. The armor's energy field expanded, filling the lab with shifting patterns of light. Each pulse seemed to bend space slightly, creating ripples in reality itself. The visiting scientists who had remained in the facility gathered around, their various sensory organs transfixed by the display. Dr. Zio, Jen said urgently, we need to move this operation. Somewhere with more space. Preferably somewhere not inside a moon made of ice. The evacuation was ordered immediately. As research teams rushed to relocate equipment and data cores, Jen stayed with the armor, continuing their silent conversation. She learned more about the Rari in those few hours than all the previous research combined had discovered in years. They weren't just an advanced civilization, they were pioneers who had discovered that consciousness itself was the key to navigating higher dimensions. The armor wasn't a weapon or a tool, but a proof of concept, technology that could evolve alongside its users, growing only as quickly as their understanding and empathy allowed. As the last of the equipment was transported to a hastily established base on Europa's surface, the armor's light show reached a crescendo. The countdown that had been running in the background approached zero, and reality began to flex. "Everyone ready?" Jen called out, her hand finally touching the containment field's surface. The armor's lights synchronized with her heartbeat, and she felt a connection that defied scientific explanation. "Ready for what?" Dr. Zio asked, though his sensors suggested he already knew the answer. "First contact," Jen grinned. "The real kind. The kind that changes everything." The armor's field collapsed inward, then exploded outward in a sphere of pure light. For a moment, everyone present, human, alien, energy being, and quantum collective, experienced a shared consciousness. They saw through each other's senses, felt with each other's hearts, and understood with each other's minds. And in that moment of perfect connection, something answered from the spaces between spaces. The Rari weren't just coming back, they were already here, waiting in the folds of reality for someone to finally understand how to reach them. As the light faded, Jen stood before the armor, which had transformed into something that defied conventional physics. It was no longer just a piece of technology, it was a door, a bridge, a key to understanding the universe in ways that even the most advanced civilizations had only dreamed of. "Well," she said, pulling out her trusty toolkit with a grin, "who's ready for the next level of movie night? Something tells me our guest list just got a lot more interesting." The armor pulsed with what was unmistakably laughter, and somewhere in the quantum foam of reality, the Rari prepared to rejoin a galaxy that had finally learned how to listen. The bridge between. The surface of Europa gleamed like polished crystal under the light of Jupiter, but it was nothing compared to the spectacle unfolding above the hastily established research base. The armor, now transformed into what Jen called a quantum lighthouse, projected patterns of impossible geometry into the space around it, each pulse reshaping reality in subtle but profound ways. Recording historic moment 2.0, Jen announced to her tablet, which was somehow still functioning despite the reality-bending energies saturating the area. Current status, about to help facilitate the return of an ancient civilization through a door made of conscious light. Note to self, update resume after this. Dr. Zio's sensors were working overtime, trying to process the cascade of data flowing from the transformed armor. The quantum signatures are unprecedented. It's as if space itself is learning how to think. Space always knew how to think, a new voice said, or rather, a new consciousness expressed itself in a way that everyone present could understand. The air shimmed, and where there had been empty space, beings of pure thought began to take form. The Rari had returned. They weren't what anyone had expected. Rather than physical forms, they existed as patterns of light and consciousness, each one a unique symphony of thought and energy. Their presence transformed the understanding of everyone who perceived them, not by overwhelming, but by gently expanding the boundaries of what was possible to comprehend. "Welcome back," Jen said simply, as if greeting old friends rather than an ancient civilization of consciousness beings. "Love what you've done with your existence." The Rari's response was felt rather than heard, a ripple of amusement that carried undertones of deep appreciation. They had been watching, they explained, through the armor. Waiting not just for someone to unlock its secrets, but for civilization as a whole to reach a point where true communication was possible. The armor was never meant to be worn, one of the Rari expressed, their thoughts taking shape as patterns of light that danced through the air. It was meant to teach. A learning aid for the ultimate lesson, another added, their consciousness interweaving with the first. How to break free from the limitations of form without losing the gift of connection. Dr. Zio's translation unit gave up entirely, overwhelmed by the complexity of the exchange. But it didn't matter, understanding flowed directly from mind to mind, transcending the need for words. The gathered scientists watched in wonder as the Rari began to share their story. They had not fled from some catastrophe, nor had they died out like so many assumed. They had simply evolved. Found a way to exist in the spaces between conventional reality, where consciousness itself was the primary form of matter. But they had never abandoned their interest in physical reality. The armor, along with other artifacts scattered throughout the galaxy, had been left as bridges, waiting for the right combination of technological advancement and emotional intelligence to activate them. You weren't just waiting for someone to be clever enough to solve the puzzle, Jen realized, watching the interplay of light and thought around them. You were waiting for someone to be kind enough to say hello. The Rari's approval radiated like warmth from a sun. That had been the true test, not the ability to crack the armor's defenses, but the wisdom to understand that no cracking was necessary. The humor, the playfulness, the rejection of force, all of it had been designed to find those who could approach power with humility and knowledge with joy. So what happens now? Dr. Zio asked, his scientific curiosity burning brighter than ever. Will you stay? Share your knowledge? Better, the Rari responded as one. We will learn together. The armor, still pulsing with light at the center of it all, began to change again. It expanded, contracted, and then multiplied, splitting into smaller pieces that retained the same consciousness-bridging properties as the original. But these weren't meant to be worn either. They were seeds, teaching tools that would allow organic minds to gradually explore the higher dimensions of thought and reality. Implementation Plan Beta, Jen muttered, already pulling out her toolkit. Or as I like to call it, galaxy-wide movie night. The Rari's amusement rippled through reality itself. They had chosen well with this one, someone who understood that the most profound truths could be approached with a light heart. Over the next few hours, as the gathered species began to grasp the implications of what was happening, a new kind of community began to form. The Quantum Collective found themselves engaging in philosophical debates with Rari consciousness clusters. Void dancers learned to extend their adaptive abilities into new dimensions of thought. Even the crystalline Zenari discovered they could resonate with frequencies of pure consciousness. Dr. Zio, watching it all unfold, finally understood why 743 attempts to crack the armor's secrets had failed. They had been trying to conquer a mystery, when what they needed to do was join a conversation. Final log entry, Jen dictated, sitting cross-legged next to what remained of the original armor. Project status, successfully turned cutting-edge xenotechnology research into the galaxy's most epic interdimensional social club. Previous record of 743 failures officially reclassified as 743 steps in the right direction. Current objective, figure out how to order pizza to higher dimensions of reality. The armor's lights pulsed in sync with her words, and somewhere in the quantum foam of space-time, the Rari equivalent of laughter echoed through multiple dimensions. This wasn't the end of a research project. It wasn't even first contact in the traditional sense. It was something far more significant, the beginning of a conversation that would reshape the understanding of consciousness, reality, and connection throughout the galaxy. And it had all started because someone thought to treat a piece of ancient technology not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a friend to be made. So, Jen asked, addressing both the armor and the Rari consciousness swirling around them, what should we watch next? The answer came not in words or thoughts, but in possibilities, an infinite array of stories waiting to be shared across the boundaries of space, time, and consciousness itself. The real adventure was just beginning.